You're listening to Simply the Best Sports Take, the best podcast breaking down the best stuff in sports with host Sean Bingham. His takes are so good, he dropped the mic, but then you wouldn't be able to hear him, and that would suck.
Welcome into STB Sports Take, Simply the Best Sports Podcast. I am your host, Sean Bingham. Thank you for being here. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor Podcasts. Everywhere you get your podcasts, we are there. Please hit that subscribe button, whatever platform you are on. This is a very special Sunday edition. Here I am, fresh off of church, in my church clothes. Still got the blue tie on here in favor of my BYU Cougs, the Cougar Blue. But how could I not do a podcast today? The Cougars broke a 12-year streak. This is like historic stuff. I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago. The last time BYU won, I was 28. That was weird to think about. I went to the game last night. I actually got down onto the field before and after the game. Everybody got down there after the game. But the atmosphere was amazing. It kind of felt like things were back, you know, like this rivalry. The rivalry gods, the football gods, really smiled upon us. You know, I mentioned in the podcast on Thursday that the rivalry was clearly dying, hardly a rivalry. The Utes are in the Pac-12. They're in a Power 5 conference. They got nothing to gain by playing BYU much. The game's not the last game of the season anymore. It's like kind of we got to find a spot somewhere in the beginning for it. They've won 9 games straight, 12-year span. It just felt like the rivalry was disappearing on us. And I said 2 things needed to happen. 1, BYU needed to win. That was first and foremost. BYU needs to win to kind of reignite this rivalry. And 2, I said that if they got into a Power 5 conference, the Big 12 was knocking at the door. If they get into the Big 12, that could help reignite it as well. Well, in the 48 hours since that Thursday podcast, both of those things happened. Both of those things happened in the next 48 hours. BYU officially was welcomed into the Big 12, and then BYU breaks the streak at 9 games and gets the W last night. It just, everything happened that needed to happen. So it feels like we're getting back to normal. I don't know if it'll ever go back to the days where they were competing for conference championships in the same conference, playing each other the last game of the season. Frequently it mattered humongously for, you know, bowl games and conference championships because they would be like both of them 10-1 or one of them 10-1, the other one 11-0. It was like major playoff implications, things like that, or like I say, bowl game implications. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that point just because they're not in the same conference. And they don't even play every year. Like, they're not going to play for the next 2 years now. So it's hard for it to be a rivalry when you don't even play every season. So now BYU officially has a 3-year win streak going. So BYU now has a 3-year win streak, just like Utah had a 12-year win streak, only 9 games, but 12 years. BYU has just 1 game, but it's going to last for 3 years. So that'll be kind of nice for BYU fans. Very fun game. Atmosphere was lit. I knew BYU would win. Dave Glauser, he's probably crying somewhere about his Utes loss. He's probably typing up all sorts of excuses and reasons why they, he's got his crimson pen out and his crimson goggles, and he's Dave's a good friend of mine. I just like calling him out because he's one of the very most loyal listeners I have. So it's all in good fun. But he did bet me. He wanted me to bet him $50. I said, look, I'll bet you $50 against the spread, which is how real betting works. You don't bet just straight up unless the line is straight up. He didn't want to do that. And so I said, okay, I'll bet you $20 straight up then, which, seemed fair. So he owes me $20. Still haven't seen that come through yet, Dave. But this was good. This just felt like the rivalry was getting revived. And it's exactly what BYU needed. It's exactly what the state of Utah needed. I mentioned being fresh off of church, wearing the blue tie. When I was a kid, for those that don't know, BYU is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There is a huge population of those church members in Utah, me being one of them. And it's very, I would say, pretty evenly split, on who cheers for which team. So it's kind of it's always been a fun tradition. All growing up, it was like a fun tradition. The Sunday following the game on Saturday, you'd show up to church, as a guy wearing, and girls would do it too, just not wearing ties, but you'd wear the color of whatever team you cheered for. Obviously, Utah's red, BYU's blue. It was kind of fun. So I kind of had that in mind today, wear the blue tie. But so much tradition, and it felt like some of it was being revived. It was just slowly dying. It was slowly dying. BYU's been independently irrelevant for more than a decade, or for a decade now. And it just felt like, wow, like there's light at the end of this tunnel. I'm still a pro sports over college sports guy, but I love college sports. Like, for those of you that thought, oh, Sean doesn't like college football, I love college football. I love high school football. I love Little League football. I just love football. But I especially love the NFL. In fact, I've got Red Zone going right here to my left as we speak. I got Joe Burrow as my starting quarterback this week, which is hilarious to think about. But he's got 2 touchdowns in fantasy, that is. But anyway, so I love football. Absolutely love football. Love college football. There's things about college football that are broken that I don't like. I don't think it's, the talent level is nowhere near the NFL, and so it's not as fun. But if they would fix a few of those things, like I've mentioned, the relegation league, the tiered leagues and the relegation system like they do in European soccer leagues, that would be incredible. But instead, we get things like, and I was going to save this for later in the podcast, but as long as I'm on the topic, instead we get things like Auburn beating Alabama State 62-0. Oh, that was a fun game. That must have been really, really exciting for all the fans that paid money to see that. I'm sure all the sponsors that saw the TV ratings go down to 0 as the score reached higher and higher, I'm sure they were stoked about the money they paid to be part of that game. Another fun one that I saw, let's see if I can find it here. Cincinnati beat Murray State 42-7. Clemson beat South Carolina State, not South Carolina, South Carolina State 49-3. Those are fun. Ooh, look at this one. Oklahoma played mighty Western Carolina, and they won 76-0. That was an important game that we all needed. I'm glad we got that one. 76-0. Come on. Like, this is what's broken in college football. You will never see 76-0 in the NFL. Never. It doesn't happen because they make sure that the competition level is pretty equal. Even when you're a sucky team and you go 0-16 like the Lions did not too long ago, you're not losing 76-0 because you're professional athletes. But this is like wildly unfair competition. Western Carolina versus Oklahoma. These are the things about college football that I don't like. To me, they're disrespecting the sport when they do that, and I just don't like it. I think they should change the system entirely. That should be a meaningless game. Instead, Oklahoma, because of the broken system that exists with how the committee does their voting to choose the playoff teams and how the BCS worked before that, you have to just blow teams out of the water. You have to run up the score. If you don't run up the score, it's like, why didn't they win by 100? That team's like a high school. Well, how about we don't let them play them instead of making them beat them down by 100 points and humiliate them? Why are we even letting them play each other? It's ridiculous. So, to me, those are the things that are broken with college football, and they're so easily fixed, and more money would pour in. I know that money is driving all of this, but more money would just come pouring in if they would make these little changes. If they had a relegation, do you know how hard teams would fight to be able to climb up out of one league into the next, and how hard they would fight if you're like this traditional school like a Texas, who's traditionally just this powerhouse, but you have a few down seasons? How embarrassing is it going to be when you get relegated down a league, and how hard are you going to fight to make it back up or to not even drop in the first place? I mean, that would be something. You can keep your conferences, keep the way you do your scheduling, but just have, within reason. We don't want these 76-0 ones. That's kind of the point. But we would say, look, you can't, if you're in League 1, you can play down a couple of games to League 2, but nothing down into League 3. Something like that. I'm spitballing as I go here, but you could still allow for cross-league play, but not this 76-0 gap where it's like clearly this is a third league over here, and this is clearly like upper echelon league. These two don't play each other, In fact, even in intramural sports, which is about the highest I got beyond high school sports, but we had divisions, and like as a competitive, quote unquote athlete, someone who wishes he was an athlete, I didn't want to play in Division 2 or 3 because that was like embarrassing. It's like I'd rather be moderately good in Division 1 than dominate Division 3, In fact, one year I remember we got relegated down a division in the flag football intramurals, and I was like freaking already 33 at the time or something, totally washed up. And we end up winning the championship, or maybe we lost in the championship. I can't remember. But we made it to the championship game, and we were like almost embarrassed. We're like, this is so stupid. Like, we didn't even sign up for this league. We got relegated down because we had lost a game or something, and I think we forfeited another one. But anyway, the point is, even in intramural sports, they have it. And so why aren't we doing it at like the real level? It just seems kind of silly to me, but they shouldn't be allowed to even play each other. Anyway, that's what's broken. You get a lot of these, bogus games that end up meaning something when they shouldn't. It's like there's nothing to gain by there's nothing to gain by just winning. You have to blow them out, and there's a ton to lose if you lose. So it's like, let's just not play the games. Just play equal competition. Makes it more fun. Anyway, back to BYU in Utah. So I called this game. I knew it. BYU had looked intimidated by Utah for years. They did not seem intimidated last night. They did not feel or seem intimidated from last season through to this season. Last season, they wanted Utah so bad. And the Pac-12 was super woke with their restrictions with all the pandemic stuff. And so they didn't allow as many games. And by the time they did allow it, Utah just said, look, we're not scheduling anybody outside of conference. And so they only played Pac-12 games. So they had to cancel last year's game. And last year's BYU team was one of the best teams BYU's had in about a decade since they became independent. Obviously, Zach Wilson, number 2 overall draft pick, who, by the way, is not looking so hot so far, but it's still first half of the first game, so we'll take it easy on him. But they dodged him last year, kind of. And so I think BYU was just chomping at the bit. And then they get this extra confidence boost the day before by getting invited into the Big 12. And there was just zero intimidation. I actually think the intimidation was coming the other direction. For the first time in 12 years, it felt like the intimidation was coming from the other side. Like maybe Utah was slightly intimidated by BYU. They were the ones that were like, oh, shoot. Like it felt like we have to win this, but I don't know if we can. And in the past, for even before the last 12 years, even when BYU was still winning occasionally, 13, 14, 15 years ago, it always felt like Utah was intimidating BYU. And it just didn't feel like that last season, going into this season and all this week. And being on the field before the game, I'll put some videos in the YouTube here. I was up close and personal with the players on both teams, and it just had a different feel. I'm telling you, it just had a different feel. So I'm hoping that the rivalry is back. Again, it's going to be tough with them not playing each other. But quick notes from the game. One note I had here that I want to mention along this same line is Kalani Sitake has greatly changed the culture with BYU football. Greatly changed the culture. That's where the intimidation factor starts to make a shift. He's done a great job recruiting, but more than anything, he's done a great job with the culture. Like he's creating a culture where football is fun. You think football is fun, sir? That's from the Remember the Titans. But anyway, he's doing a great job getting the culture back to like it's fun, but it's still disciplined, and it's winning football. It's confident football, and I like it. So kudos to Kalani Sitake. Okay, so BYU just looked better from start to finish in this game. They did from the very beginning all the way to the very, very end. They just looked flat out better. Utah's offensive line looked pretty darn good, but especially their running back Micah Bernard. That guy, he was a very, very bright spot for the Utes. Beyond that, though, they just didn't have a whole lot to cheer about. They didn't have a whole lot that was really threatening BYU offensively. And defensively, they looked okay, but BYU was able to move the ball just fine. But offensively, I just wasn't very impressed with the Utes. I really wasn't. BYU got 2 early turnovers. They forced 2 early turnovers. Only got 3 points out of it, which was really too bad. But offensively, I just wasn't seeing much from the Utes other than Micah Bernard, who averaged like 12 yards a carry. I've got it pulled up here. Let me see if I can find it. He had 12.2 yards per carry, 12 carries, 146 yards. I mean, the guy was a freaking beast, and he had 4 catches for 18 yards. He had that 20-something yard touchdown run. He also broke that run for 50 yards. I mean, he was just crushing the Cougars. He was just dicing up, slicing and dicing through the defense. But again, other than him, I don't think the Utes have much going for them offensively. At least last night they did. The offensive line is solid. That's how Micah Bernard's able to do what he's doing. But beyond that, I just wasn't too impressed. And their only win so far this year as a ranked team is against Weber State, excuse me. Yeah, that was a dig. But anyway, look, we've had to wait 12 years. Give us a little bit, okay? But anyway, and BYU just looked better. BYU is going to be ranked. They'll be ranked now. They're 2-0. They just beat a ranked team. They will be ranked in these next rankings that come out, and we'll see how they do. It's a long season. It's early. It's one game, but it's a very, very hugely important game, and the Cougars finally got it done. It took from Max Hall in 2009 all the way to Jaron Hall in 2021 to get a victory. So the last two are Halls, not related. But Max Hall was there, ran the flag out. That was kind of cool. I actually talked to Reno Mahe before the game. He also ran a flag out with his kids. That was kind of cool. It was good. It was just a good atmosphere. It was just fun. It was just bringing back all these memories for me, because like when I was in school and the few years shortly after I was graduated, BYU was really good. I mean, those were 10-2 years, consistently ranked, consistently hoping to bust the BCS, never quite doing it. The Utes did do it twice. Kudos to them. But BYU was very, very competitive, and they were competing for a conference championship. Talented teams like TCU and Utah, like I mentioned, and it was just fun. And it feels like that's just slowly died off, and it just felt good to have it back a little bit, So I'm excited. I'm excited for the Big 12. And by the way, the comparisons that I made to the Mountain West and the Big 12, I've got a lot of Cougar Blue goggles coming at me. Guys, if you want to listen to super biased opinions about the Cougars, just stick to BYU TV or something like that, or whatever the blogs are that are just very extremely biased. It's like if you're super liberal wanting to only watch MSNBC or CNN, if you're super conservative only wanting to watch Fox News. I don't want to do any of that. I like to report the truth and give a truthful opinion. I'm obviously going to be a little bit biased because I am a BYU fan, but I'm pretty good about setting my bias aside and just being real, And I can honestly say last night was very fun, but I just didn't care nearly as much as I used to about who won. I truly and sincerely did not. I just love competition. I love sports. And I will say this. The comparison I made to the Big 12 and the Mountain West, financially, I had somebody, I can't remember who it was. It was a friend of mine. I can't remember who it was now. But anyway, financially, they tweeted at me, financially, of course this is a step up from the Mountain West. Duh. But that's not what I was talking about. And we all know that. I was talking about the level of competition within the conference. And the level of competition within the conference is going to be very similar once Texas and Oklahoma are gone. It just is. It just is. I went through it. I shouldn't have to go through it 25 times for people to understand what I'm talking about. Look at the top of the conference right now, the Big 12. Texas and Oklahoma are at the top. They're both going to be gone. Okay, so that will be BYU. This is another thing. BYU will instantly have a chance to compete for a conference championship from day one. That alone should tell you that it's not the same as the SEC or the Big Ten or even the ACC or the Pac-12, because if BYU went and entered any of those four leagues, they would not be able to compete right away for a conference championship. They wouldn't. Maybe the Pac-12. Maybe, because while the ACC is probably an overall weaker conference, just barely, it's like sixes there between the Pac-12 and the ACC, the top of the ACC is stronger with Clemson. We're not beating Clemson, right? So, whereas the top of the Pac-12, it's like more debatable. Although freaking Oregon yesterday goes into Ohio State in Columbus, one of the toughest places to win, and they get a big W. A big W for Oregon yesterday at Columbus, and somebody left a nice little rubber ducky right in the middle of the O. This is very cool. By the way, side note, I sold alarm systems door-to-door in Columbus one summer, snuck onto that field, hope that doesn't get me in trouble, like literally snuck in there one night with a girl, had a nice little kiss in the middle of the O, in the middle of the night. It was actually very cool. So I've been in the horseshoe in the middle of the O before, where that rubber ducky is now. Anyway, obviously the Oregon Ducks, that was cool thing. So whoever did that, I mean, obviously must have been one of the players, had it hidden in his jersey and his shoulder pads. I don't know who did it, but maybe it wasn't one of the players. Maybe it was a fan or a band member. Who knows? But it was pretty cool. But anyway, I digress. So what was I saying? I was talking about how BYU will be able to compete for a championship right away in the Big 12, and that should tell you everything you need to know. Like, Utah still hasn't gotten a Pac-12 championship, and so, I mean, look at Missouri. Missouri left the Big 12 to the SEC, and they kind of suck now. Like, if you're truly moving up, it should take years to grow into this new thing that you've become part of. But BYU will compete for a Big 12 championship right away. I'm not saying they'll win one, especially with Texas and Oklahoma there for the first 2 years. But once they're gone, that's the whole argument. The top is very, very similar, all the way down through the first 4 or 5 teams. After that, yes, the bottom, the very, very bottom, Kansas is Suckfest USA. They're not any better than a New Mexico was in football. And so the very, very bottom's not very different. The top third is very, very similar. It's just kind of the middle to lower, third where it is a step up. And that's why I said it is a small step up, even from a competition standpoint, to be in the Big 12. It is a step up, but it's not this humongous one. Because in my opinion, the Mountain West back then wasn't a huge step down from the Power 5 conferences. Back then, it wasn't Power 5. It was like the Big 6 or Power 6, whatever they call it. I think it was Power 6 because the Big East was part of it. And we were like, as Mountain West people, we were like, the Mountain West is just as good as the Big East, and they were, and that's why the Big East doesn't exist anymore. So it could be a problem. They're just going to need, BYU's going to need to step up, Houston's going to need to step up, UCF's going to need to step up, TCU's going to need to step up, Iowa State's going to need to step up. They lost yesterday to Big Ten Iowa. So the Big 12 is going to just need these new, BYU's going to become the face of the conference, honestly. They really are. Like, you look at the teams that are in the Big 12 right now, the face is Oklahoma and Texas. Those faces are leaving. BYU will be the face of the conference. They're going to have the largest stadium in the conference, and that matters, which I don't know if I mentioned this in the last podcast. I've done so many in a row now, forgetting what I've just been tweeting and what I've been saying. But the fact that we'll have the largest stadium in the conference also tells you the conference is not what it was. Because if BYU entered the Big Ten, they'd have, I got this in my Twitter feed somewhere. In fact, let me see if I can just find it because I tweeted all of this. Give me 2 seconds here. But BYU will have the biggest stadium in the conference once Oklahoma and Texas leave. That is an indicator that the conference isn't quite as strong as it once was, or as strong as the other Power 5 conferences. Because look at this: if BYU, if Oklahoma and Texas stayed, BYU Stadium would have the third largest capacity. In the Pac-12, BYU would have the fourth largest capacity. In the SEC, they'd have the 10th largest capacity. In the Big Ten, they'd have the 8th largest capacity. In the ACC, they'd have the 6th largest capacity. This stuff is an indicator of how big and legit a conference is. It just is. And there's proof of it all over the place. If you're a big, legit school with big, legit fans and big, legit programs, you have a lot of people that come to your games. But all of these teams in other conferences have bigger stadiums. BYU will be the face of the conference, which tells me it's not a huge step up from that Mountain West of 2009. It's just not. Financially, yes, I get that. But competition-wise, it's just not. I'm sorry, it's not. That's okay. It's a huge step up from independence. Humongous step up from independence. But anyway, I think that's all I had. I did want to talk about Jaren Hall. He looked really good, not great. Passing, I didn't think he looked great, I'll be honest. From a throwing perspective, he was 18 of 30, 149 yards. That's just not great at all. He did have 3 TDs and no picks. That was nice. But he ran for 92 yards on just 8 carries. He did find 8 different receivers on those 18 completions. That's good to spread the ball around, keep the defense guessing. He did find 3 different targets for touchdowns. That's very good. And from a mobility perspective, he was phenomenal. 92 yards rushing, and he had a lifelong career highlight run, touchdown run down the BYU sideline that got called back 47 yards because he barely stepped out of bounds. That was a bummer. So not only did he have 92 yards, but he had 47 yards called back. So he almost really equaled the 149 passing with his rushing if it wasn't for that 47 yards getting called back by just barely stepping out of bounds. So I thought he looked really good. Not great, but the season's young and he'll be just fine. I'm excited for that. Guys, that's it. We got all sorts of NFL stuff today. I'm excited about that. I'll probably do another podcast tomorrow about the NFL stuff, so I want to get this one out there. Go Cougs. That was very, very fun. College football is back all of a sudden, isn't it? Just kidding. I'll see you guys next time. I'm out. Peace.
Thanks for hanging with Simply the Best Sports Take. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and check out STBSportsTake.com. Simply the best in sports. 'Cause we are